Hello, my name's Gillian Ney, and I'm the UK's first Doctor of Social Media. Now, in my life, I decided not to become a proper academic because industry was calling me. And I went out into industry a couple of years ago. I work in social media intelligence, what I call social intelligence. Today I'm going to share a little bit of my story about how I got here and what drew me into industry instead of being an academic, and how I see this specialist niche of social intelligence growing. So I was very, very lucky in my career, and I got to study social media holistically. There was no commercial pressures for me to study social media and to make money from it. So I got to understand the behaviours driving social media, being a consumer behaviour researcher, which was excellent. But about a year into that, I decided that academia really wasn't for me, and I wanted to go into industry. So I went and I spoke to some recruiters and I spoke to some organisations, and everybody told me I was unemployable. I had taken it too far, but they said, go back and be an academic. And I said, I don't really want to do that. There's so much more going on outside. So I had to take my life into my own hands and make my own way. If you bear in mind that I started my PhD in 2008, so this was in 2009 when I was beginning to approach people, and everybody thought it was a little bit wacky for studying social media so early on. It's turned out okay. So I'm no longer unemployable because I employ myself, which I think most people would do. So I started to consult during my PhD, and in amongst all of this time, I got slightly disillusioned by what was going on in industry. Now, my social media ideals are something different to most other people's because they've come from that commercial view, whereas I've been studying it holistically, and I've been looking at the consumer behaviours driving social media. So what actually made me feel disillusioned by social media? The predominant thing was what we call vanity metrics. So they're looking at things like, how many followers do I have? What has my growth been? How many likes do I have on my Facebook page? How many likes or shares did a particular post get? So what happens is it grows all the time. So everybody's like, yay, we're growing, so we're doing really well. Social media ROI debates came into play during this time, and there's a lot of different metrics out there that give you a really great figure, a huge figure at the end of it, and that's how much money you've made from social media. But that's not the true case. There's one publication, one article that was published in the Harvard Business Review. It was completely slated by the reviewers, and the person who wrote it came back and said, don't treat it as a homework exercise. Take it to your clients and show your clients how much money they're making from social media. Now, to me, that's a real lack of credibility there, because we've got economists and statisticians coming back and saying there's something wrong with this model. We need to change that model to make sure it's right. We're not really looking for the large number at the end. So the real reason that this has been happening is because it's all about being about eyeballs and click-throughs. That's because marketers have kind of taken control of social media. It seems to be in their responsibility. But we need to, again, coming back to taking a holistic approach, look at that and what the behaviour surrounding that is. So because marketers use click-throughs and they use eyeballs in terms of reach and things like that, they're trying to apply this old situation that they know. They know those metrics because they've been traditional metrics, and they're trying to apply them in a new way. But social media doesn't really fit with that. If we look back into history, this is not the first time that this has happened. When we moved from using horse and cart into car, we measure car performance in horsepower. We don't measure it in engine power. Nobody really knew what an engine was, so we measured it in horsepower because people could understand what that is how fast that vehicle is going to go. So what people are doing in the marketing field is they're taking these old reach metrics and these click-throughs and the eyeballs and everything, and they're trying to apply it into this new format, but it's not quite working. So it's not enough to take the old metrics and apply them to social media. If we take this for an example, this was me a few weeks ago in March, and I was lucky enough to go to San Francisco for work. And I took a bit of time out and I posted this. Now, this got 18 likes on it. So does this mean that this is special because it got 18 likes? It doesn't mean that it's special for me because it got 18 likes. I see other things in here that measuring things by metrics just wouldn't cut. We've got where I am, which is not my usual place. We've got what I'm doing, which is maybe a different interest for me. And we've also got how I'm feeling. So there's thoughts, feelings, and emotions in there that marketing metrics just don't pick up properly yet. And then if we move on, increasingly there's emojis being used within social media and within text messages. How can marketing metrics understand those? It's not enough to count how many they are. We need to begin to understand the meaning behind that emoji, and what's happening just now is not enough to be able to get us to that stage of understanding. Now, I'm not the only person that thinks this way. I'm not the only person that says we need to look at the conversation. There are many tools out on the market, and there's more coming on the market every day that do look at social media conversations and try to break down the conversation. But this is the type of insight that you get from those tools. And anybody see what's wrong with this one? We'll take one example from here. So we've got tickets, and we've got Disney on Ice Frozen tickets, but they're talking about the same conversation, but they've been plugged out as two different conversation fields. We need to be able to apply them all together to understand what it is that people are saying about tickets. Not that they're two key topics that have been driving through. So it's the way that people have written that. The technology doesn't actually pick up the language properly yet. Here's one of the best examples I like to give. This looks great, doesn't it? This looks absolutely amazing. But it doesn't really tell you very much, does it? Can anybody follow those lines and begin to understand what that means? I mean, it looks really, really good. So a lot of these tools are still fundamentally flawed because they do amazing digitalization and visualization of things, but they don't really begin to understand the behavior surrounding that or what people are actually saying. So the place where I start is somewhere quite different. Now, I've told you I'm a consumer behavior researcher, so I start from consumer behavior. I start from understanding the behaviors. And I think that what we need to do is we need to begin to understand the behaviors and then make new metrics to be able to quantify those behaviors, not apply old metrics that are already quantified and place them into social media, into this way that we've already got here. So what I say and what our motto is and where I work is measure what matters and not what flatters. So we're taking off the vanity metrics that show a steep growth, which should really result in a steep value curve. And we're actually measuring what matters within social media, not what the best thing that's going to say that campaign or that particular post was amazing. We need to get to understand more about it. Now, to give some examples of this was from the World Cup last year. Now, Luis Suarez here on the floor holding his teeth. He was the most talked about football player during the World Cup. Okay? So you could assume that because he's the most talked about football player, then he was the best football player. If we go on and have a look, this was from the Indie Ref. When we looked at the debates, I did some work around the debates and analysed the conversations from each of the Indie Ref debates. Now, Alex Salmond was coming out as the winner of these debates, and his social conversation footprint was higher than what other people's was. But did that mean that he won the debate? Well, some people would say yes, but in the work that we did, it showed a different light. And again, if we take the Indie Ref as a whole, the Yes campaign had a much, much greater digital footprint than the Better Together, and there was so much more engagement about it. But we're not an independent country, so if we're looking at these metrics alone, you could get a false positive there, because if you were looking at the Indie Ref stats, you could automatically assume because there's so much more conversation, it means there's so many more people behind it. But there were vanity metrics were at play here. So this is the place where I start. It's the context. So if we go back to Luis Suarez, he was the most talked about football player because he beat another football player. It wasn't for his football skills, it was for his poor performance on the field. If we go back to Alex Salmond was being mentioned a lot within social media during these debates because he was shouting, because of the way he was dressed, because of his tie, because of his hair, because of the way that he stood at a lectern. It wasn't about his politics. It was more about him as a person than what it was about the politics. So when people were saying that he was winning these debates socially because he had such a bigger footprint, when you go in to actually understand the context of that footprint, it wasn't that great because it wasn't about the politics, it was about him as a person. And again, when we go back and look at the IndieRef debate, we've got a thing called the spiral of silence. So what happens during here, particularly within politics, because we don't really like to talk about politics in front of other people in case they have a different opinion to us. So this is what was happening as the Yes campaign was growing and the voice from that campaign was growing. We've got the spiral of silence where we don't want to disagree with that dominant voice. So the people who did disagree with that, they took a step back and began to roll down, whereas the Yes voice was growing and growing and growing. Now, we would never have got to understand that without understanding what the wider environment surrounding there and what behaviours actually drive political conversation. So this begins to be even more complicated. So we know that context matters because we've just had those examples there. Now, there's some new research coming out to show that every one of us has up to 12 different personas. Now, we don't all suffer from multiple personality disorder. It's just that we have different personas, so because we've got different interests at different times, and these can be impacted by the people that we're with at a particular time, or just maybe we're like sailing, but we also like running, but just now I've got my sailing head on, I'm not really thinking about running. So if we need to be able to market to people at the right time with the right context, we also need to understand what persona they're actually pursuing within that time, because it needs to be relevant to them. So how do we achieve this? It's social intelligence. Like I say, we need to measure what matters and not what flatters. So if you think about what I was doing when I was in San Francisco, I was out on the bay sailing and I was feeling great. So that tells a lot about me as a person. Measuring the number of likes, about how many of my friends actually liked that post, isn't really that significant because you're getting to understand who I am as a person, which means if you understand that properly, well then you will be able to market your products and services to me more successfully. So we're adding a layer of context on top of there. To give this a good example, so for fun, about a year and a half ago, we decided to follow all of Celtic's Twitter followers on Twitter for a day. Now, this was a game day. It wasn't a significant game, I have to say, but it was a game day. And we followed all their conversations. So every single thing that any of those people who follow Celtic said within Twitter, we got that data. And we crunched the data. And we thought that we would learn a lot about football that day. But unfortunately, we didn't. The football conversation was less than another conversation, which happened to be about One Direction. So we don't automatically assume that Celtic fans are also One Direction fans. So we're going, what is going on here? And it's not enough to take the data alone. You need to understand what happens. So we went back to do some research, and it turns out that one of One Direction had played a football game at Celtic Park. And then when all the girls were there, when all the fans were there, they decided, well, let's follow Celtic. So if you go back to the vanity metrics about how many followers you have, I know that a proportion of Celtic's followers are actually One Direction fans. So we can't always measure engagement from that. We've got to again go in and look at the context and the persona that person is using to engage with that brand. Now, this has massive implications on the future for me. As I said, we're looking at this context and we're looking at what drives these social media conversations. So what we want to be able to do is to understand people and to get the right message at the right time on the right platform to the right person. So what we're trying to really do is add a level of artificial intelligence within to marketing. It means that there'll be no more real interruptions because you'll only be getting the products and the services and the brands that you're actually interested in coming. Now, just now, when I talk about artificial intelligence in marketing especially, everybody's slightly standoffish. It doesn't really psychologically fit yet. But it's a bit of time off. A little way off just now. And what we're doing is we're doing more of those projects like the ones we're doing with Celtics of the world and things like that to build understanding there, to show how powerful this can actually be. It means that we're not going to get bombarded in the future. If we begin to understand everybody on an individual level, we know what they like and we know their taste, and we can actually more easily market to you, which should stop the interruptions. Thank you.